Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SAG-AFTRA podcast. I'm Duncan Crabtree-Ireland, National Executive Director of SAG-AFTRA.
And I'm Ben Whitehair, Executive Vice President of SAG-AFTRA.
On today's episode, we'll take an honest look at how to survive and thrive as a working actor. Let's face it, from mastering the craft to making ends meet, acting is rewarding but hard work.
Hear, hear. As a working actor myself, I very much understand how much effort it takes to survive and hopefully thrive in this business. Whether you're just starting out or have been in the business for years, actors must create a healthy lifestyle that works for them financially, creatively, physically, and mentally.
To help guide you, we are joined by working actor and self-proclaimed broke actress Sam Valentine. Despite this moniker, Sam has created quite a successful podcast and website platform called One Broke Actress, where she shares real-world advice, tips, and stories from people in and around the acting business.
As you'll hear, Sam's take on the acting life is honest, but also hopeful. We're so excited to have her on the show to share her working actor wisdom. Sam, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks
Welcome.
for having me, guys.
Sam, I'd love if you could start by just telling us a little bit about your background and what had you start the podcast? What was the inspiration for that?
Yeah, so I'm from all over the Midwest, and I went to school for acting. I went to college for acting. And when I got to California, I got to LA, I was like, let's show them what I got. And nobody wanted what I got. And I realized that although I had a theater degree, I was not prepared for this business at all. So I kind of floundered around, tried to make it all work. I asked questions of everyone I met because I just feel like there was no place to get answers to how this business worked. I didn't even know where to get auditions. I didn't understand how the union worked. Everything was so confusing. And a few years into being in LA, I had a podcast with a friend that was really fun. And I started interviewing other actors and putting it on a blog I started because I realized everyone had a blog in 2016. You know, everyone just had a lifestyle blog. And I was like, no one's doing this for actors, so I'll do it. And had a lot of imposter syndrome because I didn't feel like I was booking enough or consistently to be considered an actor. Started it anyway, and off to the races. I started interviewing actors and transcribing their interviews into blog posts, only to realize that this would just make a better podcast. So the podcast was born, and I just continued to throw questions at people who I thought would know more or have a different experience than me in the business. And I've learned so much. I feel like it also benefits other actors around me, which is just the dream boat, because then it becomes less of a competition and more of us all, a rising tide brings up all ships.
You and I have very similar starting points, actually. When I first moved to LA, I started a blog because I didn't know what the heck the industry was and how to do it. And I had a friend in New York and a friend in Chicago, and we were blogging. Like you said, this was back in the day when blogs were the thing, and talking about what it means to be an actor. Like, what does that actually look like? And I was doing interviews and transcribing it. And here we are on a podcast together. So, no, I love that.
And now we don't have to read, so it's so much better.
So much better. Now we can do it while we're driving like everyone else in Los
Exactly.
Angeles.
Well, that is helpful.
What was the name of your blog?
It was called Playbills versus Paying Bills. And it's still technically on the internet, but we don't write for it anymore. And, you know, I do a lot more other stuff in that space. But yeah, we were talking about, you know, what does it actually mean to be an actor? And one of the things that I really appreciate about what you said is I think, you know, education, particularly formal university education or otherwise, I think really trains people on the craft in a lot of ways, but there's not a lot of information on the business and what does it actually mean to take care of your financial health, your physical health, all those things that I know you spend a lot of time talking to people about. And so I love what you're up to.
Thank you.
One of the things that I know you emphasize is the importance of creating a healthy lifestyle sort of around your acting career. What do you mean by that? Like, how does that play out?
Yeah, when you get to this town, especially when you're not from here, which most of us aren't, and you are trying to build a career, it's going to take probably a long time. I realize that most people are longer term actors than we realize. I think we're sold a dream of like, get here and get discovered. And like, I'm really still trying to figure out what get discovered means because I'm still trying to get discovered. And there's so much more that goes into it. And so that means you're going to be doing this for a long time. And if we're going to be doing something for a long time, it has to be somewhat healthy because you can be in a toxic relationship with someone, but it has a beginning and end date on it because it's not sustainable. You can't be there for a long period of time. Same with an acting career. And I think figuring out ways to sustain being available and being good at this work involves a lot more than just being here. I think that this job requires so much of you financially, so much of you physically, and so much of you mentally. And I just want actors to know what they're getting into and how to best prepare themselves for that.
That's such a good point. And, as someone, I'm of the three of us, I'm not an actor. Haven't been since 8th grade, and that's probably a good thing
What
for the world.
did you do in 8th grade?
In 8th grade, I was in an 8th grade production of Sweeney Todd, believe it or not, which, I've always questioned why. Sweeney Todd for 8th graders? I don't know. Seemed a little early. But my reviews were not favorable of my British accent. So,
Oh, you had an accent too.
I did. And
Yes.
the worst part was I was doing it in London. I lived in London at the time. So my British accent was poorly reviewed by
Real British people.
by real British people, so that's fine. But I am married to an actor, and so I have had the chance to watch, what it's like for someone who's trying to build that acting career. And it is, I think what you're saying makes so much sense because, when I think about someone like me, I've worked here at SAG-AFTRA for almost 23 years, so, I don't have to go out and look for a new job every day or every week or every month or every season or whatever. And so I do think it is really important to have that strong position and that self-care so that you can not internalize the difficulty of going through the audition process and trying to find work, because that is such a huge part of the job of being an actor, unfortunately.
Yeah. And self-care means different things to different people. But I think we've really been shown that self-care is going to get a massage and getting your nails done and all these things. And that's really nice. But most actors who are trying to book work probably can't afford those things, especially on the regular. So that's kind of the world I want to function in.
Right. Obviously auditioning can be a difficult thing, especially if you're not booking a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the feeling of that is not necessarily great, but maybe having other activities on top of that you can do that help reinforce, a more positive mindset about what you're doing in life. Or maybe it's creating your own constellation of opportunities so that we've heard a lot about that from various people. And I don't know if you have thoughts on that. Obviously, you've done it. So
yeah, I had no idea I was doing it when I did it. I want to be clear. Because this podcast started in the time of everyone saying, make your own web series. And I was just uninterested in making my own web series. And they say it as though it takes like 2 seconds to turn on a camera. And web series are intense. Like they are full productions. And I just couldn't get my head around, I want to write a script and then I produce it. And I know how much work goes into it. And so what I did was found my in. I found the thing that gave me a reason to wake up some days and gave me some purpose and also was in line with my values as an actor. So it took me a while to get to that point, and the podcast has gone in different directions, and so has the entire platform. But getting to this point, I've found a way to ask questions, to talk to people who I probably have no business talking to sometimes, and to get out in the space, which is really exciting. And it does feel creative and it does excite me. And I think that is what I call my tablespoon of hope that just keeps me working in this business longer so I can meet more people, so I can get more experience, so I can get upwards in my acting career. And my podcast is now, plug, SAG-AFTRA, because I make enough money that I can file it for my pension and health. So now I'm So now I'm paying into my own pension and health with my own creation of a podcast. And that feels so special. I feel like I have so much more control over my long-term health and sustainability in this career. And it was actually really easy to put everything together. Shout out Shane from the podcast division. She's great.
Shane is great.
But it's cool because I accidentally built this thing. If you'd have told me 7 years ago, hey, this is what this is going to be, I would be shocked. Like, I'm in the SAG-AFTRA office talking to you guys for your podcast. That feels so out of my league. But how cool is this, that this came from that?
Yeah, it's one of the things that's evolved over time. 10 years ago, there wasn't a way to do that. The contracts weren't structured that way. The benefit plans weren't set up that way. And so it really does reflect the evolution of how the business works. And I'm so thrilled to hear that you're able to do that.
Thanks. It's pretty great.
Sam, I'm curious, you were talking about the long-term mindset, which I think is really valuable. I think, my vision for my fellow SAG-AFTRA members and future SAG-AFTRA members is a sustained career in the business. And I know when I was first looking at, moving to LA, the idea was like, start a web series, but it's like, move to LA, get an agent, book a pilot. And like, if you haven't made it in 6 months, then you're probably not meant to be an actor. And I thought very early on, if anybody gave that advice in any other career, you'd be laughed out of the room. If I was like, you want to be a doctor, go to med school for like 6 months. And like, if you're not a brain surgeon, then I don't know, maybe you're not meant to be a doctor. And it's like, that's crazy. But there's this idea. And like you said earlier, we get sort of sold the, publicist story of, overnight discovery. And I actually do think that that's changing a little bit. Mm-hmm. I was just reading a story about Pedro Pascal and talking about, so many, probably almost every actor that people know has generally been around in the business for at least a decade before people knew who they were. But that doesn't mean that people in the industry didn't know, right? That casting directors and writers, right, they're building those communities. So my question is like, what has supported you? And you were talking about it a little just now. What supports you in continuing to embrace that long-term mindset? And what advice would you give to other people who are maybe struggling with doing that?
It's so hard. And I will say it gets easier as you get older because your life, the way you look at the world just changes. I made a point of surrounding myself with actors who were ahead of me in this business and who were much older than me. And their mindset rubbed off on me so much because they told me inevitably, this is what this is. And I remember specifically, there was a period of time where I was booking a lot. I was non-union and I was booking like this project. And, they probably paid me a total of $2,000, but I felt like a baller. Like I got this on lock. I got this so in control. I'm going to be so successful. And I remember I was at work that day for an events company I worked for. And one of the actors I was talking with, I said, I feel like things are going really well. I might just quit my other jobs. And he looked at me and he said, I remember those days. So I think that's great, whatever's happening for you, but just know that there is a lot more time coming down this pipe and it's going to look really different as your career changes. And I'm so grateful to him because it made me stop and pause and think, well, okay, I do want to be here for the next 20, 40, 50 years. And that's the kind of advice that you don't really find in classes on the internet, especially back then. If people are telling you like, invest in your career, go all in. And now I talk to actors, I'm like, what does all in mean to you? What if you had a job that sustained your finances so you could stay with the coach or the class you liked? What if you built a life that was filled with so much joy that when you got an audition, you're like, oh man, I really didn't want to cancel this coffee date with my friend, but I guess I'll do it. Like, what if that was the thing? And that's, the more I do that, the better everything has been.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that one of the things that a lot of actors need to hear early on in their career is if they plan, if they really feel the passion for acting and they want this to be their lifelong career, it is important to think about things that a lot of times, newer people in the industry may not think about. Things like, how are you going to plan for the ability to have a retirement? Mm-hmm. How are you going to get health insurance? Like the basic things that are kind of in a way boring and not what any artist really wants to be focused on, but which are really important to just being able to live a happy, healthy life.
Yes.
Have a plan.
Yes. I wish someone would have said when I was 22, get an IRA right now. Because I just found a statistic that said I lost about 6 figures worth of savings because I didn't start my IRA when I was 20. And I could have put $20 in it. There was just so little education on the lifestyle that was necessary, but there was so much education on craft and get this for your audition. I think most actors, there's no lack of enthusiasm for craft and for learning. And we all want to have the best self-tapes and we all want to be so good at this job. And everyone wants that. But we don't want to sit at our computer and respond appropriately timed to emails or pay our dues on time or make sure that, our finances are in a good spot. But that is also part of the job.
It is. And I think it's also part of why, I was so happy to hear that your podcast is under the podcast agreement because, those contributions into the pension plan really so few workers in our country today have access to a pension plan. Everyone's having to deal with IRAs and 401ks and defined contribution plans. And those are great, but the problem is it's really hard with the limits on contributions and the fact you have to find your own contributions to put into them to really build the kind of retirement that people deserve. And so one of the things that we're really proud of at the union, of course, is the pension plan, because if you are a working actor consistently over your career, then there will be a pension there for you if you're working under union contracts to help make sure you have those resources when and if you ever decide to retire.
Yeah, and something as for younger actors who might be listening, this used to go in one ear and out the other. And I was like, pension, retirement, I'm 25. And that's no longer the case. And I just want to say, if someone's listening and they're like, this doesn't apply to me yet, yes, but also it does. I know it's hard to understand, and there's still so many parts of my own contracts that I don't always understand. But having a rough understanding is a good starting point. And that's another thing, that protecting yourself financially, just joining the union, I thought, well, this is just the box I have to check. I join the union and then that's I'm done. And now I go back to auditioning and working, because that's the jazzy part. I want to be on set. I want to be auditioning. Like that's why I got here. But understanding what came with joining union, understanding the benefits and the classes and things that I missed out on and things like that, understanding what ramifications it was, and the openness of things like the podcast contract, the influencer contract, are all built to help us. And it's very much becoming with the times. And I think if we could start to explore that at a younger age, it will open up a lot more doors than just focusing on the auditions, booking side of the thing.
Yeah, and you get stuck, because the thing is, even though it's natural for people, earlier in life to be less focused on retirement, the problem is it's not something you can do at the last minute. Right?
Yes.
Like if you just leave it alone, don't touch it, and then you don't do anything, and then all of a sudden you're at that point in life, and it's like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And you don't have to do very much. And of course, if you're working on union contracts, you don't pay into that. The employers pay into that as part of the deal. But there's building up over time while you're busy thinking about other things, doing other things. It is really important. But I know the topic of this is not just retirement 101.
How
but it is so
boring can I
important.
talk
It
about?
is important though. And I'm really glad that you had, mentioned it, because it is a topic that the SAG-AFTRA Foundation does have some online webinars that talk about some of these topics, some of the, like, as you said, not craft, but like business life of an actor topics. And so, but I don't think there's ever enough resources for people on that, because, we see people who've gotten stuck because they didn't have all the info that they probably should have.
Yeah, it's so similar to your physical health, I think. Like we put so much emphasis on the moment and not the future. And I think it's very similar.
The thing that I would say to younger actors especially is that having even a cursory knowledge of these kinds of things will allow you to perform more often. And, I often say if most of the actors I know who left the business, some decided that the lifestyle wasn't for them, or they had found some other passion. But I know a lot of actors who absolutely had the talent, the craft, the skills, but not thinking about these kinds of things just made it extremely difficult to stick around long enough to have those opportunities come up where you can then be on set or book the series or be in the movie. And so my invitation to people is not that you have to, completely switch your entire life around and just spend all day on spreadsheets and emails. I want people to be performing more, creating more. Like, we need that. And the way to do that, I think, especially if you want to get paid, is to, on some level, treat this as a business, because everybody else in the industry is. And I know, at least for me, that's removed some of the pressure. Like, oftentimes people are making a business decision that has nothing to do. I might have had the best performance somebody has ever seen in their whole life, and I still don't book that role because of some other business decision.
That's why artists and creative professionals need unions so much, I think, because you're exactly right, Ben. I mean, the rest of the industry is a business, but they are more than willing to take advantage of the fact that you are artists. And it's not only actors, it's also writers, it's other creators. And so you do have to have a bit of a business mindset or you'll be taken advantage of. And I think, that's where this union came from in the 1930s, is because of exactly that situation. And it's still true today.
That's one of the things that I've loved so much about my volunteer service in the union, is just seeing how many people are working day in and day out on our staff that are doing those things for actors, right? Lawyers and all these people that we have. Oh my gosh, as a union member, I have all of these built-in support systems and business reps and attorneys and CFOs and all these people that are handling not everything, but a lot of that side that would be so hard to do on our own.
Yeah, it really releases you up to be more creative when you are backed up. It's just like showing up to a set when you're not producing your own web series and you get to show up and just do your one job. It's why hair has hair, makeup has makeup, wardrobe has wardrobe, directing, camera, grip, everyone has done their job. So all you have to do, I'm not going to make it that small, but we really have one specific job most of the time. And being able to just sign a contract and hand it back to a PA who knocks on your trailer door is very freeing. And like you said, having a cursory knowledge of that contract also helped me in my career to feel less alone and less unguided as a creative person.
You may have one specific job, but that's a really hard job. And more importantly, it's the central job. If you don't create the magic of the creation, then the rest of it means nothing.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Sam, you, I know in your podcast and otherwise have talked about, a couple different categories of best practices for working actors, looking at the craft, as we've talked about, the lifestyle pieces, and then the mindset. And I'm curious if you have thoughts or advice for anybody who's navigating this career on what you think of in terms of those different categories and how to have that holistic approach to your career.
Absolutely. It's something I think about often because sometimes my brain starts moving much faster than the world around me is moving. And I want to be 10 steps ahead. I want to be ready for my series regular, even though I'm auditioning for co-stars. I want to be the lead in this commercial, even though I'm literally basically no lines. I always want to be in the right place for the right thing and be ready. And I think so many of us in this business do. And to mentally slow that wheel down, I have to think of each division of my life as things that I can take care of on my own, because I don't have control over when I'm going to get that series regular audition. I don't have control over booking the lead in a national campaign. But I can tell you that I go to bed roughly around the same time every night, and I get up roughly around the same time every morning, and I have a day-to-day schedule that makes me happy. Little things like that gave me back control. And, there's parts of this lifestyle that lend themselves to having a bunch of jobs, running around town like a crazed person, especially before COVID, and I was that person. But finding a way to craft a future that also takes care of me has been a game changer. And so I would say to other actors, look at the specific pieces of your life that when someone says that, I have to do a podcast about this because I hate it so much. When someone says that phrase of go all in on your acting career, what would that specifically look like for you? What does that mean? Does it mean that you read a script every single week? Does it mean that you change your health and fitness routine so it actually takes care of you, not you taking care of it? Does it mean that you're in class consistently? What are those things and how can you take care of them? So if it's a mindset thing, if you're so concerned about being the person who books or lining up with someone else or a comparison, I would say that's something you want to focus on. Definitely check in with the mindset, because your brain will work twice as hard as anything else and it will convince you of things, right? So that's a huge check-in point of the mindset. And then the rest is a slow roll to build the lifestyle that you want to maintain so you like your life.
And maybe so you don't assume that, so you set for yourself what means success.
Yeah.
And not just rely on what the media or what, Hollywood hype says success. I mean, if you take it out of the world of acting, I mean, not every CEO has to be CEO of Amazon or,
Right.
or whatever. Not every, doctor has to be Fauci to feel that they have accomplished something really important and had the career that they really wanted. I mean, and I think that should be true for performers and actors too, which is not everybody needs or wants to be this or that.
Yes.
It's really up to you to decide what is the success you're looking to achieve and to remember that so that when you achieve it, you have that moment of appreciation and acknowledgement for what you've accomplished.
Yeah, or else you just keep spinning because we always push the bar higher. We're always going for the next big thing. And it's not just creatives, it's everyone. A lot of us are bred to excel and exceed. And what's the next thing? Great, I got that. But if you don't stop and take it in, you will totally miss the moment. And I started to do that so often. And I realized that it's not just bookings, but, having a great meeting. Having a great meeting with someone that you didn't know before and connecting with a human, you have to celebrate that in some capacity. You have to take that in. Because I'll be honest, great meetings, more often than not in this town, do you more good than a lot of auditions will. So being able to craft those type of things.
That's a good tip. They should note that tip. That's
It's so true. And I'm a big fan of celebrating every step of the process. If you get an audition, you're already in the top 1% of actors. Based on how many were submitted, if you're getting requested to audition, you're already in the top 1%. If you get called back, you're in the top 1% of 1%. Like, you've already succeeded. And I think it's challenging because I do think creative industries are different from others in that success does not always come with a paycheck, right? Being on Avail for something does not come with the same paycheck as booking the role, so it feels so different. But to me, that is still massive success, and treating every next success as a bonus. If I get the audition, that's a win. If I get a callback, that's a bonus. If I book it, that's a bonus. If if the project actually goes through, that's a bonus. If I end up in the final cut, that's a bonus. If my paycheck clears, thanks SAG-AFTRA, that's a bonus. Like, treating every step of the way as part of that success and celebrating the things that are not just the standard, audition, callback, getting an agent, right? Some I don't know where I learned that. I don't know if this was your experience, Sam, but it was early on. It felt like those were the only things that mattered as an actor, was if you got an audition, if you booked a role, or if you got a new agent. Like, somehow those were the only things that you could talk about or celebrate.
Yeah, I think it's the culture that it's built around is what gets a deadline headline, and there's so much more to it than that. And all of that stuff, the celebrating the wins, is really hard to do if you haven't taken care of yourself mentally, financially, and physically, because it's really hard to celebrate in Avail when you got no money because I really needed that paycheck, that kind of a vibe. It's really hard to have a great coffee date with a casting director you've never met before when you are going back to the job you absolutely hate. So building that lifestyle, and I'm not saying it's instant. It took me 12 years to get to the point where I like the jobs I do. I really love my life, and I don't have that many credits. I haven't been doing that much, but it's super fun, and I really like it. So, I think that that's, to me, way more important, and it's because I've worked to figure out what works in terms of taking care of my mentality, taking care of my finances, and having a day-to-day life that supports this career.
There are challenges, I think, for actors that represent sort of like the difficulty of taking that step forward. Sort of like being on Avail and then not booking or whatever. But then there are also sometimes challenges that I think sometimes hit hard because they feel like a step backwards, something like getting dropped by your agent or getting recast. Do you have any tips or thoughts on how people deal with those steps, what feel like steps backwards?
Yeah. This is where I think a community comes into play. If you don't have a community of actors around you, get one. Find one. I run one online, but there's so many different people who run them in different spaces, whether it's a class, whether it's an admin group your friends created. Some agents get their actors together once a month and just say, everybody meet at this coffee house. I've seen it done and people really like it. You need to be surrounded by others so you realize, so it's profoundly told to you that that is not actually a step backwards. Because when you're alone in your apartment and you get dropped by your agent or you haven't had auditions, perhaps there's a potential writer's strike going on and you're in a weird place in your career. It can feel so personal and it can feel so lonely. So having people to have this discussion with, hey, who's been dropped by an agent? What's it like to get cut out of a show? That's where you really need your community. So you realize it's so not about you, and other people have experienced it and they can help you with that mindset shift. And that's part of the reason I have multiple articles on One Broke Actress about, I was removed from a set once because they thought I was too thick for the role. I was dropped by an agent because he was a really terrible person. I've been cut out of shows multiple times. And I think the more we talk about it, the more we normalize it among our community, the easier it is to realize that, like you said, Ben, it's all just a business.
And, to just as one example of that, to refer people to at the SAG Awards this year, Jamie Lee Curtis talked about how she was fired off of her own
I loved that
dad's
speech.
series, but it was only because of that she was available to be in this indie horror film called Halloween, which basically made her career. So, obviously, not every setback is going to come with that level of opportunity, but maybe, it is important to know that when you look at it in the big picture, sometimes those setbacks really do actually open up other doors.
Yeah. And what a gift of the internet that we have now that we know that story. Because she wasn't allowed to tell that story on the first Halloween press tour. She definitely was not telling people that. But now, because we have this space where people like me and so many others are sharing their journey and their actor life, it opens up so many more doors of knowing those stories and knowing that it's really not about you, and there's so much more coming down the pipe.
Right, and those things happen to other people too. It's not just, even though it feels like it's just you, probably
always
in that
feels
moment,
so personal.
right? It's not just you, and that it's a shared experience, and you're not alone.
Sam, if you could go back in time to when you were coming out of school and entering the professional world of the industry, what advice would you give yourself?
To take an on-camera acting class because I had a BFA and I thought, I majored in theater. I created my own minor in mass media. So I've watched a lot of film and TV and I've done a lot of theater. So I clearly must know what I'm doing. I had no idea how to work with a camera. And when I first got here, it was there was no self-tapes. It was all in person, and I didn't have the experience of seeing what I looked like on camera, or seeing how big things were or how small they could be, and seeing how much you can tell when someone's lying on camera. Oh my God, when you don't believe a moment, you can see it. And that's why we love these HBO shows, because when a character, like on Succession, is telling a lie that's written into the script, we know it. So I wish I would have done more on-camera study when I first got here, because I was not prepared for this particular business.
Yeah, and what's so cool about that is that even with the phone that people probably have in their pocket or are listening to this on, you can practice those on-camera techniques. There's a great book by Patrick Tucker, The Secrets of Screen Acting, who's a British director, that talks a lot about all those different tools and tricks and gives exercises to like practice the on-camera technique. But yeah, I very much resonate with that. I was very fortunate. My college, University of Colorado, Go Buffs, had started in my year. They started a class that was half actors and half directors, and it was all on camera.
So
and then
smart.
we would switch. Like the directors had to be actors in scenes, and the actors got to direct. And like getting to see how different the mindset was and have an appreciation for what everybody else is doing. And when we talk about different ways of understanding our contracts in the business, I think that's one of the things that's also been really supportive for me, is getting a deep understanding of the incredible art that happens with every other position outside of acting, right? From the lighting, like you said, makeup, hair, wardrobe, like everything is it's why I love watching the credits, because it really does take such a massive team of people to make this thing and hopefully make it look easy.
Yeah, and another reminder that we are a part of the machine, but we are not the whole machine. So to support others and understanding the other jobs that are on set, that's another piece of advice I'd probably give myself, is to look around and see how many people's jobs are a part of this. So getting to know casting directors and how their job works, getting to know producers. I didn't understand what a producer was for so long because I just didn't take the time. I was like, I don't know, there's like 1,000 of them. Sometimes they're not even doing anything. So getting to know the positions of what creates this job, it's like understanding your ingredients as a chef. It's so important.
Sam, I so appreciate you spending time with us and sharing the wisdom that you've learned, and hopefully giving people some, I know I certainly relate to the journey that you've shared. If people want to hear more, learn more about you, where do they do that?
Awesome. Yeah, everything's One Broke Actress. So the One Broke Actress podcast, One Broke Actress on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube.
So you were smart enough to nab those the second.
It used to be the number one Broke Actress, and I couldn't get the name. So I finally got it years ago. And then I'm Sam Valentine on those platforms as well. But that's mostly just pictures of my dogs and my husband.
That might be another tip we should add is like grab your professional name the second that you know what it is. Grab it.
Yes.
Yes.
And hold tight.
I was an early adopter of Instagram in college, so I think I got lucky on a lot of those.
Well, thanks so much. We really appreciate all the advice and just encouragement I think that you've shared. And to me, it's, as someone who spends is not an actor, but spends my life surrounded by actors, I would just say, I think really acknowledging that there are ups and downs to this career and knowing how to, stabilize so that it doesn't hit you too hard and positions you for that future success, that's invaluable. And I know a lot of people who hear this will really benefit from it.
Oh, thanks, guys. This is such an honor to be a part of. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks so much, Sam. For more information and resources from today's episode, please visit sagaftra.org/podcast. And if you gained any value from today's podcast, please consider sharing it with someone else who might find value. If you haven't already, please tap that subscribe button and take a few seconds to rate and review this episode. And please follow SAG-AFTRA on our official social media channels. That's @SAG-AFTRA on all major platforms, including YouTube.
The SAG-AFTRA podcast is produced and edited by Aaron Goddard and John Small. Supervising producers are Pamela Greenwald, Shira Reich, and Michael McNulty, with production and marketing support from Damon Romine, Jolie Cocante, Delaney Howard, Margot Giordano, Joe Mulgado, May Wong, Bernadine Robbins, and Maria Cabezas. The podcast is hosted by Ben Whitehair and me, yours truly, Duncan Crabtree Ireland.